Blood, Guns, and Money. That's the topic of a book by Ioan Grillo, Blood, Gun, Money How America Arms Gangs and Cartels. Particularly salient given the situation at the southern border and the influence of cartels. We talked a bit about with reporter from Real Clear Politics, Real Clear Investigations, actually, the other day, his embedding with that Arizona Border Recon volunteer group to document what's happening in the quote unquote cartel controlled Badlands south of Arizona and provide information to law enforcement to help interdict cartel activity, whether in the form of drug running or human trafficking.
And the cartel tried to pay him off to stop business to the tune of 15,000, I think it was.
15,000 a month
Yeah, a
to
month.
stop monitoring them.
Yeah, please
right?
go away. Don't look at us here.
Well, there have been other efforts that have been spectacular failures when it comes to interdicting cartel activity. Most notably, former Attorney General Eric Holder's Fast and Furious program that ended up funneling guns to cartels. It's an odd position for the Department of Justice to take. What Ioan Grillo's experience investigating the gangs and cartels and the trafficking of weapons? He is a journalist based in Mexico, focused on crime and drugs, police, and gangster politics. We know a lot about that in Chicago. Ioan Grillo joins us now. Ioan, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here, Dan.
So, your focus on cartel activity on both sides of the border and the description that America arms gangs and cartels. Explain how America does that.
Yeah, sure thing. I've been here for 22 years. I arrived here from the UK to Mexico. I found myself, originally, thought I'd be kind of running around in Latin America with guerrilla groups in the jungles and that kind of thing I'd seen in the movies. But I found myself in a very different era covering these narco wars. It got a lot worse while I was here. Began as quite a kind of glamorous assignment, following around these big drug lords, and I found myself just covering scenes that I couldn't have imagined. I've been just seen many more dead bodies than I can count, and been at these massacres and shootouts, and found myself really covering this what's basically an effective armed conflict, a weird hybrid armed conflict here. So for a long time, I was looking at where all the weapons coming from. We're talking about particularly about the AK-47s, the AR-15s, these kind of the main guns really driving a lot of the violence. There are also things like 50 caliber, and then we can get into things like rocket propelled grenades and that kind of thing. And then you have what we could describe as an iron river of firearms kind of going from the United States into Mexico. So, at first I thought for a long time, well, this is, there's the issue in the United States of the Second Amendment and so forth. What can we really find out about this? But then I started to interview gun traffickers. I interviewed one gun trafficker in prison in Mexico, in Ciudad Juarez, about exactly how you get in these firearms. And he described, the process of doing it, where he'd go up and buy with no paperwork whatsoever, and go and finding out the techniques they're using, how they're using these kind of straw purchasers, who are in some cases, like one crazy case where a straw purchaser went and bought more than 700 firearms and $500,000 around Phoenix. And so there's a lot more to this about what's happening. And I think many people who are supporters of the Second Amendment and big supporters of gun rights don't want this level of firearms going to the cartels. It's against the U.S. interest. They can be, in favor of gun rights, but not the fact that somebody without papers can be buying this many firearms, that people who have got criminal records, people who are in the country without, undocumented, illegally in the country, are also buying guns. And the kind of basic law enforcement is failing on this. And so that's a lot of what I was looking at. The numbers are huge. I mean, an estimate of more than 200,000 firearms a year going from the United States to the cartels. Also, the Operation Fast and Furious, I look at them in detail, something you mentioned. So the time I've been here, millions of guns and a very, very painful situation here south of the border.
Well, what was I mean, besides the obvious failures of a dead agent, a dead border patrol agent, and guns ending up in the hands of cartels, what was the failure of imagination or execution in Fast and Furious, in your estimation?
I think in Fast and Furious, I mean, first of all, I think you have to look at the way that the federal operations have gone in many spheres over the decades. I mean, the kind of things that the DEA do, that a lot of these things do, it's like these ideas of creating kind of sting operations. You know, with drugs, it happens as well. You watch people move drugs to put up a conspiracy case to bring out the big guys. That's kind of the thinking. With heroin, you don't have serial numbers on them. You know, on the packets of heroin or packets of fentanyl, there's not serial numbers, so you're not, seeing this. But with guns, you do. So basically, this idea that you can kind of, it was the idea of building up a big conspiracy case. Now, I think I don't think it was a like there's kind of ideas or conspiracy theories you could say around it. There was a kind of deliberate attempt to kind of flood the weapons into Mexico. I think it was more of a failure that they didn't understand how the cartels operate. They're quite diffuse criminal networks where you have a lot of different players and different kind of cells within them that are quite isolated. So they were following one group of straw bars, acquiring large amounts of weapons and trying to build up from them to get to the kind of very top of the cartel, which they failed to do. The guy, one of the lead investigators, had been busting guns in Minneapolis before, and thought, I can do this stuff, and it's very different dealing with a cartel.
Well,
Now, sorry.
Oh.
So I mean, so what is it that the United States is getting wrong in terms of approach? And we have all these series of late that are sort of popularizing the move from one cartel and one kingpin to the next, or from in the last 40 years, from Escobar to El Chapo, and even going back before Escobar in Mexico and in Colombia, and so we don't seem to be impacting the drug trade. We don't seem to be impacting gun running. We don't seem to be very much impacting human trafficking now. So, what is it that law enforcement is not getting?
Yeah, I think. I mean, these are big strategic things. So sometimes you can have agents who are doing good tactical work on like bringing down these drug lords,
Right.
and and a lot of the DEA agents, a lot of long interviews with them, and a lot of them are very brave guys who do kind of good work and risk their life going undercover and trying to bring down these drug lords. I think strategically, it's kind of failed strategically. So on one side, if there is a market in the United States, which according to the Rand Institute, there's like $150 billion a year spent on illegal drugs in the United States. If that market is there, then it can be Pablo Escobar, it can be El Chapo, or now we've got these guys, El Mencho, Los Chapitos, bring this stuff. They're going to keep on serving to that market. So how can you reduce that black market? Now, there's a bit of a bind with the drug laws, because I'm not in favor of impunity, and also they're bringing now with fentanyl, it has changed the game. I think we're living through a revolution in terms of the type of drugs used. With we have now the synthetic drugs. So before, for many years, they were bringing these drugs based on the crops of opium, the crops of coca leaves for cocaine, the crops of opium for making heroin, and then marijuana. And that's kind of revolutionized now to working with China and bringing in this stuff, which they're changing to synthetic level. And the effect is so much stronger. So there is now, a harder case of trying to stop and deal with that. But even so, it would take quite extreme methods to try and stop this down. And in some ways, it's kind of like a kind of whack-a-mole situation where you kind of arrest a few dealers here and there. You can bring down the big players, but the market is still kept intact. So I guess there needs to be a real discussion about what America wants to do with this. On one side, kind of some really effective rehab treatment and trying to get people off drugs. I think maybe in the case of marijuana now, it's kind of it's still a bit of a halfway house with marijuana. So you still have organized crime involved with marijuana. So make a decision if you want to really try to take that completely away from organized crime.
Yeah, but marijuana is legal now in most states in America, so
Yeah,
I think that's why they're dipping into fentanyl, don't you?
I think I mean I agree, and I agree that the marijuana legalization didn't stop this. There's still a funny halfway house though, that whereas there's still some marijuana being taken over the southern border by cartels even now, way less than before. And you still have where some states where it's illegal, kind of trafficking over the overstate borders and so forth. So it's still a bit of a halfway house. But yeah, I mean, in some ways, marijuana is kind of a behind, well, or outside the worst of this now. And so yeah, and maybe I know how to try and really fight fentanyl. I mean, fighting there's some cases of using homicide charges against individual fentanyl traffickers, and quite harsh measures in the United States could be effective if that was used. But it's a very tough challenge.
Well, do you think Biden's administration wants to stop the guns from going south of the border, wants to stop fentanyl from coming in, wants to stop sex trafficking?
I think the Biden administration has been ineffective. I think I think sometimes it's the lack of will. It's the lack of unified policies. I don't think Biden administration is like deliberately wanting this stuff to happen. But I think they should have more attention to. I think the fentanyl crisis, and when you do have 107,000 people dying of overdose deaths in a year, and 70,000 of them having fentanyl in their system, that's a very serious thing to try and have to pay attention to.
Well, with your perspective, I mean, since you've been down there for 2 decades, I mean,
Yeah.
really, has U.S. policy and strategic approach, has it changed much since Kiki Camarena was executed by the cartels in the mid 1980s? Has it changed much? Have we gotten any better? Are we producing better results? Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a tough history of the last few decades. I mean, in terms of what the results are now, and it's sad to say this, it's kind of in some ways worse than ever on both sides of the border, because we have in the United States, a record number of overdose deaths. I mean, the crazy stuff. We go back to say the 1980s when we're talking about Kiki Camarena and the crack epidemic. Then, back then in '88, there was less than 4,000 deaths, or around 4,000 deaths from overdose in the United States. Last year was 107,000. So the overdose situation is way worse. People dying of overdoses in the United States after all this money spent and all these efforts to find it. In Mexico, now we're talking about over 30,000 murders a year in the country, which is a third of the population of the United States.
And what is and what is? I mean, so now the other side of the aisle. What's changed in Mexico, going back to Salinas all the way forward to Obrador now? I mean, the corruption, the murder, the cartels operating more or less freely. Has anything changed in Mexico in the last 40 years from a strategic approach perspective?
I mean, yeah, it's transformed. It's transformed for the worse, but it's transformed. I think what we saw in Mexico, and you point out to Salinas in those days, so you had 71 years of one party running the country, a bit like kind of compared to the Soviet Union and so, one centralized party running everything. Didn't have that level of authoritarianism, but it was a lot of centralized control. Now it was corrupt, and they worked with drug cartels, as the people in the Kiki Camarena case found out. But it also was effective in having a certain kind of level of order. When you had this move, and this is a sad side effect, you had this move to kind of a multi-party democracy in Mexico in 2000. Different party, Fox came in from a different party, former Coca-Cola executive, the idea of bringing free markets with the North American Free Trade Agreement. But this decentralized power and the cartels rose and became much stronger. Now, what we effectively see and what it really looks like, and I spent a lot of time around, I've been every 32 states in Mexico, spent a lot of time in these places. And to give an example of what it really looks like with this kind of cartel control, in one area, we were trying to film some TV footage, and we had a warning, given from the cartel. First of all, the journalists there to tell us to leave. And we asked to speak to the cartel people, so we want to talk to them, saying we want to try and film in this place. And the guy came, and eventually they turned up with a bunch of AK-47s in the back of their car and first pretty threatening, and we kind of managed to talk them down and say that we just want to, be here. And the guy said, like, you can't film now, you have to leave. But you're okay, you'll be okay here. And if you have any problems with the local police, you give me a call.
Right.
So it gives you an example of how they control and kind of run things. And I've seen them and been with police there who are literally moving bags of drugs in their cars and so forth. But you have these so the cartels have kind of risen up as a kind of form of kind of warlords in some ways in parts of the country, chunks of the country. And then now a kind of return a bit to a more militarization, boosting the army under the current president, López Obrador.
He is Ioan Grillo, journalist based in Mexico, focused on crime and drugs, police and gangster politics. The book, Blood, Gun, Money, How America Arms Gangs and Cartels. Ioan Grillo, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Venture X card from Capital One gives you premium travel benefits, perfect for seeing Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. Presented by Capital One. Oh, I do love her. Earn 5 times miles on flights and 10 times miles on hotels through Capital One Travel.
Enjoy your stay in Suite 13.
Whoa, 13? That's Taylor's lucky number. The Venture X card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details. Attorney CPA Joe Cordell.
Divorce forces a father to focus on what's most important, his children. You may no longer be a husband, but you'll always be a dad. In the divorce process, this comes down to 3 key concerns: physical custody, decision-making, as well as financial support. Each of these is important, and it's important that you choose